Hello and welcome to Lightways at Live Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and I'm absolutely delighted because Joseph Crane is back. Hello, Joseph.
Once again.
Once again, yeah. So now you are doing a workshop, I believe it is, at the Kepler College on the lunar nodes. Is that correct?
Yes, this is true. April 13th.
Good. Okay. So that's why you're here because it seems to me that my audience can't get enough of the nodes. So what
Oh dear.
so tell me what is it about the nodes that really grabs you?
Oh, we'll begin with the fact that in my book, I hardly mention the nodes. And my book is on the seven inner planets. And people said, Joe, you don't use the nodes very much, do you? And I said, yeah, I think you're right. And so um, although I was trained by an astrologer who used the lunar nodes extensively, I sort of dropped that a few years into my astrology work. And so what I decided to do is my book came out. I gave myself a month to not do a whole lot. And then I started collecting things on what were the traditional meanings or the uses of the lunar nodes. What are they astronomically? How do they factor in assessing an astrological planet? And I found all kinds of interesting things. And and then I decided to look at the charts that I use in my book and a few others and say, okay, how would using the nodes change my perception of them? So that's how I got started on this. And part of my difficulty, the reason I haven't used the nodes for a long time is because I couldn't understand why the latitude cycle of the moon has so many solar features. And think about the North Node and the South Node, how astrologers generally use them is the North Node is about one's drive toward, evolutionary intent or toward the best version of oneself or toward the what is growthful but difficult, and the South Node being more habitual. It's like the South Node sounds a lot like what we think of as lunar in sort of a stuck kind of way. And the North Node sounds very much what people would like to get out of their astrological suns. So the fact that I have North Node conjunct Sun in Capricorn might be part of it. But and so and also um, to be further heretical, if you have a client, or maybe you, I don't know what your chart is like, but let's pretend for a moment that you have a lot of planets in cardinal signs, like the client I just saw, but your North Node is in Gemini. So I'm supposed to ask you or uh, counsel you to be more Geminian when you don't got that. I'd much rather look at a Sun in Libra and you expressing Libran characteristics, Venus, cardinal, that sort of thing. Saturn is, exalted in Libra, etc. Then a North Node in Gemini that it's like I would be asking you to be somebody you're not. So these are my heretical points of view.
Okay. And I would say that it's more subtle than that when we're looking at the lunar nodes.
Okay.
It's not about you becoming your north node in a sense. It is, in my experience, about themes of challenges that we encounter. So it's more about qualities that we are developing, muscles that we're developing, if you like. So the way that I would say it is, yes, you are a Capricorn, and no, you have no Gemini. However, there are some lessons here about communication and how to communicate in a way that is simple and understandable for others. So it's about distilling perhaps information into something that's user friendly, maybe. So it could be any number of things, but all of the themes are going to be around communication. So yes, you may be a Capricorn, and that might be part of the issue, because if you are a Capricorn, especially if you have something like Mercury in Capricorn, you may be a little bit reticent to share your views,
Mhm.
to speak. Well, that North Node in Gemini is telling us another story. It's saying, actually, you may continue to weigh your words carefully, but you still have to speak. And
So
that the lessons around there are around
I-
communication.
two things, one funny and one sort of a further question. The funny thing, of course, is I have Sun in Capricorn, but Moon is in Sagittarius. So so communication isn't particularly a problem. Excessive communication might be. Um, but also
Ah,
the question is, if you have a client, let's say with Sun in Capricorn and North Node in Gemini, which I don't have, by the way, then what resources do you give a client to further their communication?
so then you'd have to look at the rest of the chart, because the
Uh-huh.
fact of the matter is we're human beings and we all have the ability to speak. So that's good for starters. So, most of us, if everything is working properly, have this voice and we need to use it. So then I think you have to look at everything in context of the chart. So
Mhm.
you would look then at, I would say, I mean, for your example there, you've got the moon in Sagittarius. So yes,
Mercury in Sagittarius, but Moon too. Okay.
or the moon, Mercury, and so if this north node, hypothetical north node, was in Gemini, I might say, okay, do you know what? Sagittarius can be really good at abstracts and philosophizing and losing everybody because they lose themselves in the abstract. But Gemini actually is just about the facts. Sometimes a chair is just a chair. There doesn't have to be additional symbolism behind it. There doesn't have to be no philosophy about this chair. Sometimes a chair is just a chair. So I would say that if that was the case, then we're moving towards the ability to simplify everything so that actually, as I said, it's user friendly. It's not everyone's a philosopher. So you have to be able to speak both languages. You have to be able to speak at a symbolic level, but then you also have to be able to be understood. So everything is context. And so these would be the themes. So it could be that if you did have the North Node in Gemini, there are going to be some challenges in your life that mean that you are going to have to learn how to speak in a way that is understood and simple. Um, and maybe it's not about communication. Maybe it's about learning. Maybe it's about being able to process information. So the challenges might be around that. So everything really is within a context. But yes, the resources are going to be there. It might be that it's a Sun Mercury conjunction. It might be that it's a Venus Mercury conjunction. The resource
Lovelier.
Mercury is there in the chart somewhere, and it's doing something. And that's going to add information to that North Node in Gemini.
So if I have South Node in if I have North Node in Gemini, then I have to have South Node in Sagittarius, which would be the same place as Mercury and Moon in my chart. So, so the idea is you'd be telling me to act less Sagittarian,
Yeah,
although that's where my planets are.
exactly. So if you think about the moon is quite habitual. And if you've got the North Node in Gemini, as you said, the South Node's going to be in Sagittarius. So the misconception that people often have with the lunar nodes is that you're supposed to forget that South Node. Well, really, that's the past. That's your experience, your roots. And I would never say that because that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You need to grow beyond what you are, but remember also who you are. So it's not about saying, let's come back to the example of communication. And it's not about saying that you stop being a great philosopher or that you stop having conviction, but that you learn how to distill that into something that is, as I've said, user friendly. And I think this is it. There's a lot of nuance with the nodes. I think you could probably tell I like them a lot. Um, but that's because a lot of the work that I do with clients is is to do with personal growth and understanding and sometimes exploring the purpose. What is the purpose and why? Why do these things keep happening? And the nodes are in there subtly, quietly pointing at the answers to those questions.
Then I change the subject, but only slightly, is why the lunar nodes?
Now that's a
What's
very
the moon's role here?
so tell us.
Oh, okay. Let's compare the lunar nodes are points on the moon's latitude cycle that correspond to the equinoxes or 0 degrees of declination on the sun's cycle. Okay, so that you have a planet in this, let's say we'll start with the south node. So it's conjunct the ecliptic, but going south in latitude till it gets to what are called the bendings, which is the highest point of latitude, which would be like 5.5 degrees south latitude. Then it begins to go north. It hits the ecliptic again at the north. And then it goes to the northern bendings, far north latitude, and then down. And so there's a comparison between the sun's declination cycle and the moon's latitude cycle. So instead of bringing a whole lot of solar stuff into it, although we do use the ecliptic still as a main reference point, what if the nodes were really about modes of adaptation? And whereas the sun's position is much more about individuality or identity or the continuity of our experience, whereas the moon, that ever-shifting planet that we can't see right now because it's a new moon, is much more about how we have to pivot, how we have to adapt to new experiences, how we have to deal with the fact that there's no food in the refrigerator and we have to find some because we're getting hungry. And anything related to that, so that an adaptation is definitely part of our fate here as human beings, because we have not only these physical bodies, but this social, this cultural mandala. So that would be answering my own question about what the nodes may have to do with the lunar, with the moon. And also, I mean, obviously the cycle of the nodes are fairly quick, whereas the nodes of the other planetary bodies are much slower. So it's really hard to do astrology with planetary nodes, although it's fairly easy with the lunar nodes. So that's my sense of how the moon gets involved.
Yeah,
Possibly
and
as an alternative explanation.
yes, and I like that. I like the adaptation aspect of it because, again, in order to adapt, what you're doing when you're adapting is you're taking in information and you're changing according to the information that you're getting, which means that you're growing and developing. So that makes perfect sense.
Sometimes just keeping body and soul together is sufficient.
It's absolutely. And I think so that's quite important. But I think my answer to your question about why the lunar nodes,
Mm, mm,
I because we have, quite aside from the practical side of it, it's easier to use the nodes because they move quicker. I think that plays its part. But I think too, it has to be the lunar nodes because the sun and moon and the relationship between the sun and moon and us is the most intimate relationship we have with anything in our solar system.
mhm,
Life on Earth is what it is because of our relationship with the sun and moon.
mhm,
So it would be those nodes. And then if you take that into the symbolism behind the sun and moon, again, that makes complete sense because if we take the sun as being the identity, the person that we're developing into, our personal growth, and the
mhm,
moon is about our emotional experience and um, our sense of security and our needs, our physical needs, then of course it's going to be those nodes that are going to be most significant.
okay. So I think you mostly agreed with me.
I completely agreed with you.
And
You're coming at it from a different angle, but I can completely see exactly what you're saying, and it makes perfect sense.
if you look at, then, okay, then what's the role of the sun aside from the moon? I agree that the sun-moon relationship is like of, supreme importance, especially when anchored with the ascendant.
Absolutely. But I think the sun is the essence of the chart in a sense, because it's the center of our solar system.
Mhm.
The sun is the center of everything. Without light, there is nothing. I mean, life really
Well,
needs light. I know that we've discovered that there's light, that um, there are simple light forms right at the bottom of the sea where there's very, very little light, and we
and sometimes I feel like we're in the middle of a black hole, but that's when I just feel depressed.
can that's when Saturn really comes at you, isn't it? But the sun is light, it's warmth, it's vitality, it's life, it's
Mhm,
everything.
mhm,
And I think it's the very core, and so that's why it represents us, because we as individuals only have one filter through which we can perceive the world, us. So we are the center of each of our individual universes. Obviously, we need to learn that we need to be able to empathize and connect with others,
Yep,
but
yep, yep.
that's part of growing up. But when we begin life, that's not our perspective. We think everything revolves around us. And that's the sun. That's because we have this perception. It takes a while. I think it's only around the age of 4 that children begin to realize that not everybody thinks like they do. that what's going on inside their heads is not the same as what's going on in everybody else's heads. So this is the sun. This is us being the sun in our own universe. And part of that growth is understanding that our perception is limited,
Mhm.
and that therefore we don't have the whole picture. We can't see the entire puzzle of existence. We can only use our imaginations to attempt to understand another person's perspective until
Mhm.
you learn astrology, which
Mhm.
then thankfully gives you an insight that's perhaps closer to being able to imagine or see the world through somebody else's eyes a little bit. Um, could never assume that you're seeing anything through anybody else's eyes, but you can more easily place
Right.
yourself in that position.
And that
And
was when
this,
I discovered astrology in my 30s. It's like, oh, you mean nobody thinks the way I do? It was
exactly.
actually quite revelatory. It's like, oh, these people, they live in a different universe than I do. But I want to mention one thing though, about the sun and its visibility. I have a birthday right next to the winter solstice. Okay. And so on my birthday, I can have to wait a while for the sun to rise. Takes a while for it to rise. Then it goes up, goes a little bit, and then it plunges. Next thing you know, it's dark again. Okay. So that's going to condition my expression of individuality. It's a very Saturn kind of placement. Whereas Sun in Cancer obviously rises early, comes, fairly high in the sky, depending on where you are in the northern hemisphere, and takes a long time to set, especially if you're in the UK. And and these are extremes of the sun's declination. And both of us long for the spring equinox. And I think both of us probably are looking at the fact that it's a few weeks past the winter solstice, and the days are getting a little bit longer, and this is a really good thing. Um, and so this is the sun's declination cycle. And yes, we have our identities, our personal identities, but we also, for astrological reasons, use where the placement for understanding. If you had Sun in Cancer or in Gemini, this is high north declination, and it's a sunnier kind of thing. And so what I've done is I've taken the same pattern and I've applied it to the moon's latitude cycle, so that the northern bendings are similar to the luminaries. It's bright place. The southern bendings are more Saturnine. It's a darker place. It's a colder place. So that they say back millennia ago that Jupiter and Venus really like the north node, and Mars and Saturn the south node. And you could say, oh, malefic, but benefics, malefics, but I think there's another possibility. What do Venus and Jupiter have in common? They're both moist planets. They're both planets of bringing things together. What do Mars and Saturn have in common? They are dry planets. They separate things. So I thought, maybe a mode of adaptation of a planet is conjunct the north node would be to sort of bring things together. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be benefic, but it does have to have that quality of integration, of synthesis. Whereas the south node, we'll call it analysis. We'll call it taking things apart. It's like, oh, we can do things with this. So Saturn conjunct the north node may be a more integrative kind of Saturn. then if, if you have, let's pretend you have Mercury at the northern bendings, that might be a Mercury that wants to express itself. And the southern bendings would be more reticent. So, I mean, it's just a, it's a way to bring some symbols together in a way that uses the nodes to talk about not planetary strength as much as planetary versatility.
I like that.
And one thing I discovered, it was really fun. I'll share this. I look very closely at how Ptolemy looked at planets conjunct the nodes and at the bendings. And he used the word polytropos for the northern, a planet near at the northern bendings. What the hell is polytropos? It's in the first line of the Odyssey that talks about Odysseus as being a multifaceted or a man of many turns, literally. Or as a recent translation says, complicated. And so that sort of got me into thinking of modes of adaptation, of an ability to sort of pivot to we say in America, turn on a dime, because a dime is a very small piece of currency. So this is all exciting. It doesn't exclude the idea of the North Node possibly being a place of abundance. And bendings are not used so much. You see them in some of the evolutionary astrologers. We'll talk about aspects to the nodes. And it feels a little on the speculative side to me. So, by the way, we have the moon in Capricorn right now. All right, we just had a new moon, and I'm going to check something. Yep. Do you know that when the North Node is in Aries, when the moon is in Capricorn or Cancer, they're always out of bounds?
Now that's interesting.
I saved it for last.
So what do you feel that means?
Okay, wait. That's called a major standstill. When the North Node is in Libra, it's always called a minor standstill. So we have the declination is much narrower for the moon. Astronomically speaking, I do not know why. But from a point of view of the original use of the nodes, aside from predicting eclipses, it was also used to figure out sort of where the moon rises, sets furthest north, where the moon rises, sets furthest south. So it's very much about the visibility conditions. When a planet is at its northern bendings, it's going to be further north than you would expect from the sun's position. So I could go on, but the astronomy is fascinating, and as yet, I haven't figured the whole thing out.
I'm just thinking about this business of being out of bounds and
Yes,
mean because this has happened. It's happening right now. North Node is in Aries, and
right.
we had this new
Or,
moon.
that's
I,
right. So the
and if
declination is minus 26 degrees. Usually it's about 23.
and if I remember correctly,
That's northern.
this new moon is at 20 degrees,
Mm-hmm.
which is exactly where the North Node is right now. So there is a new moon square to the North Node at 20 degrees.
Yes. Yes.
I hadn't thought about that until right now.
Yes.
We're
Good.
talking. because you mentioned the out of bounds. So we've got a new moon that's square to the lunar nodes
Uh-huh.
and it's out of bounds.
Yep. In the
There's quite
south.
there's quite a lot happening in the world at the moment.
Yes. I kind of noticed. Yeah.
I mean, there's
In
been
in
quite
in
a lot on in the world for the last 4 years, but right now, as we speak, we have a lot going on in Germany, in Poland, particularly.
yes. Yes.
There's quite a lot that's going on all over
Yeah.
Europe
Yes. I think it was Ecuador, some
or
people
Ecuador.
just overran a news broadcast.
Mm. So,
What happened in America is today.
yes, yes, your poor country is, I think, somewhat of a dismembering under a Putin return. So I think we'll leave that out because this is
But I
an
wanted to I wanted to add though, in 2 weeks, when the moon is in Cancer, it's going to be out of bounds north. So it has this huge swing when the north node is in Aries and the south node is in Libra. It's further testimony as to the power of the tropical zodiac.
So I'm thinking about last year when Mars was out of bounds. It was quite an eventful period. Um, I mean, it was an eventful year. It's been, as I've said, an eventful coming up to 4 years. Um, However, that within accepting that this is an eventful time period that we're all going through and which doesn't seem to want to end anytime soon, even within those parameters of unusual eventfulness, there are periods where things are more intense.
Mhm.
And certainly when Mars was out of bounds, things were more intense. And right now we're experiencing the moon's nodes being out of bounds. And they too, and this is too, is also a period of intensity. So I'm going to have to give that some thought and a bit of research, I think, to see about what's been happening in the
Yeah.
past.
Look up lunar standstills. It was
So
actually
I
it
just
was
want to clarify
yeah.
something before you say that. Are you saying that the whole period when the North Node is in Aries, that the nodes are out of bounds, or is it only during that period of Capricorn?
Oh, only of course, only during the period of Capricorn be out of bounds south, Cancer out of bounds north.
Okay, so that's the period that we need to focus on and have a look. Good, because I just wanted to make sure that that was the because I'm I'm now curious about December of 1968, which would
Okay.
have been another one of those out of bounds months. And
For the moon?
the nodes would have been in Aries then.
Hang on a second. What, give me the date again?
December 68.
Okay, December.
I'm or 67. I maybe both, or at
We'll
least one.
see. I'll let you know. It's lovely to having a monitor. Um, okay. Yes, North Node is 6 degrees of Aries, and that would definitely be another out of bounds period for the moon. There would be a major lunar standstill. Yes.
That's interesting because that, obviously 68 is a famous year for things happening also. Um,
Um,
and and then I think that probably means that in 67 it happens too.
67 would be a little different. Hang on.
It-
I think less intense. One moment. Doo-doo-doo. Okay.
Well,
Yeah, the north node would be 25 degrees of Aries, so it wouldn't be a standstill, but there'd be a wide separation.
yeah. Well, that's very interesting. And it's certainly given me to food for thought. And I imagine there's a few people in the audience who are going, hmm, I think this needs further investigation. This,
Okay, so I now know the most exciting part of my presentation. Okay. It's very good to kind of you know, work things up over time.
I think I'm enjoying the coming at this from a fresh perspective. So that's really nice. But it's really made me think about this because we are living in the time we're living in. Obviously, the moon's nodes will have been in Aries between 68 and now, and I need to just remember when that was and have another look. But it kind of adds to the flavor of the time
Hmm.
that we've got this going on. Um, they're not alone in Aries. Chiron is in Aries too. And it's at 15 degrees right now. So that's not that far
Well,
from the
think of it this way as if if the moon cycle is about reacting, then out of bounds would be like overreacting.
exactly. That's exactly what I'm thinking about is that emotions emotions are running extremely high and it's in Aries after all. So
So does that mean that everyone should be more emotionally outgoing?
I think that it's more like a reflex, an impulse. And the
It's good.
challenge is to balance it because violence, aggression, anger resolve nothing. They actually exacerbate the situation. And at this moment in time, many of us, in fact, probably most of us, are feeling quite emotional and angry. So I think that this is a warning, and maybe the the nature of Capricorn is helpful here because it's inviting us to measure our words carefully
Or
and
to take a cold shower.
take a cold shower. Yeah, to take a cold shower and come to some sort of understanding
Mhm.
rather than simply reacting because the answers are not in overreacting. And that does not mean, and my therapist hat jumping in here, that does not mean that we don't acknowledge anger or that we
Mm,
suppress
of course.
anger. Absolutely terribly unhealthy. And that will lead to explosion. So we
Mhm.
can't do that. But what we do need to do is acknowledge, understand, and then create something constructive rather than impulsively
Mhm.
react. And that's different. It's about being measured in the response rather
Right.
than simply
Yeah.
reacting. So I think
And
we've been
building.
we've been talking about world events, but clearly this is true for every individual on this earth.
This planet. And you're in one of the more peaceful places right now. Hope it
Uh,
lasts.
yes, just at the moment. Just at, who knows? Who knows? I believe this country has. Now I'm just trying to remember. It's either Chiron and no, it is the North Node is in Aries for the U for Great Britain.
All right.
So I do believe it could be that it's Chiron. One of them is in Aries right now.
Okay.
No, sorry,
Well,
one of them,
Chiron's in Aries.
but I do believe that it is the North Node that I'm thinking is in
Okay.
Aries for the country as well. So. Oh, Joseph, well, this has been, as ever, a most interesting and fun um, look at a chart, and in particular today, the lunar nodes. And so, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. You can
So,
have your dinner and I'll have my lunch.
yes, indeed. Um, Now, just a reminder to everyone that Joseph's workshop at Kepler College is on the 13th of April. I will put a link to that in the description
Thank you.
box,
Thank you.
along with a link to Joseph's website, which is,
Astrologyinstitute.com.
and you mentioned your book. So, can you remind everyone of what
It's
the title?
called Astrology and the Lives of People,
Okay.
which is,
And I'll link to that in the description box too.
you.
Thank you so much.
Yay. Thank you, Anna. We'll talk more. Much to say.
We will indeed have more to say in the future. And so thank you again. And thank you all for watching. Now, next time, we're going to continue to look at world events, perhaps, or just the themes for this year once again. So until next time, goodbye.